Thank you again for joining us for our third Tech Days 2024 session. I'm Angela from the Winnifox Library System, and joining me today in the background is Lori Freund from the Bridges Library System, helping me make this presentation happen for all of us here today. Tech Days Wisconsin is brought to you through support from the Department of Public Instruction, the Library Services team, with support from the Institution of Museum and Library Services through LSTA funding. Additionally, thank you for the continuing support of Tech Days from all 15 of our library systems. Today's webinar will be recorded, and it, along with the slides shared, will be available on the Tech Days website later today. The recording will also be professionally captioned, with those captions available starting on Monday, again on the Tech Days website. So today's webinar, our final webinar, is Empowering Lifelong Learning, AI Guidance for Enhancing K12 and Library Education. Joining us are Monica Treptow and Chris Baker from the DPI. If you have questions as they are presenting, there will be time at the end of their presentation for us to engage in some Q&A. So we ask that you use the Q&A button that you see on the bottom of your screen to post your questions there. Lori and I will be monitoring that and sharing those questions with Chris and Monica after their presentation. If you have any other comments or technical difficulties, Lori and I are here to help you with that. You can use the chat to communicate directly with us. So with that, Chris and Monica, I'm going to turn it over to you to share your screen. Thank you again for sharing with us today.
Thank you so much, Angela and Lori, for inviting us. I think I speak for Monica as well. We're super appreciated to be here and to be connecting with all y'all out there in the digital world over this topic today. So as mentioned, the title for this slide today, or the title for our presentation today, is called, which is the same title that we gave to our AI guidance, which was just recently released by the DPI back in July, is Empowering Lifelong Learning, AI Guidance for Enhancing K12 and Library Education. And so this will be an update today about sort of how we got to where we're at today, an overview of that document, as well as where we're headed. So as Angela mentioned, my name is Chris Baker. My pronouns are he, him. I'm a public library consultant and games and learning consultant with the Library Services team of the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction. Just hit my 2-year mark with the team, which I'm very thankful for and proud of. And prior to joining DPI, I worked as a youth services librarian, teen services librarian, and adult services librarian at various points in my career, as well as a technology coordinator at the Spring Green Community Library and then the Portage Public Library. So I'll hand it over to my colleague, Monica, to introduce herself.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you to Tech Days for having us again. And my name is Monica Treptow. I am the school library media education consultant for DPI. I use they and she pronouns. Been at DPI for a little longer than Chris. Just closed at my 7th year. And prior to that, I was a school librarian in the Mecklenburg-Thiensville School District. I also worked in Port Washington, currently live in Cedarburg, and started my career as a high school English teacher. So it's been an interesting pathway to get where I am today.
Thanks, Monica. So so today we're, as I mentioned, we're going to be offering an overview of the document, and I think, and Monica will set the scene for this a little bit as she starts off with her first slide, but I know that some of you, if you've seen some of the other Tech Days presentations already, you got to see in action some really granular uses of AI in various forms, and we're going to be giving a little bit more of a broad perspective on AI, which we of course would have to do as the state agency, but that means that hopefully you can utilize the time to start generating some great questions to ask us at the end of our presentation today, and we can dig into it a little bit more. So go ahead, Monica.
Thanks, Chris. All right, so Chris and I actually started working on our concept ideas and education around AI right after the big splash of ChatGPT. So it was actually really early on in 2023 and maybe even in 2022 when we were already doing some professional development and trying to figure out how this technology and the evolution of the technology was going to impact libraries, both public and school, and the education world in general. DPI started putting together a full work group in the summer of 2023. And at first the group just met for discussion purposes and sort of to compare ideas of where people were at and where others in the agency were, and where different folks from throughout the field in both schools and libraries were sitting with AI. And I will admit early on, we had a lot of people that just really weren't sure about a lot of different things with this new technology. In January of 2024, Dr. Underly and the DPI cabinet, so the leadership of our agency, tasked the Division of Academic Excellence with the task of being the leaders in creating guidance for schools and libraries. And so to take the DPI language out of it, or at least to help explain it, Chris and I are part of the Division for Libraries and Technology. And there are about, I think at last count, about 6 different divisions at DPI. So academic excellence is really focused on a lot of the content areas in the schools. So they were the ones taking the lead. So we had a core group of team members from around the agency that started doing a little bit more research and looking at what was available in other states and trying to figure out where we wanted our guidance to go. That may sound like a simple task, but I think we got caught in the spinning wheel of this changes constantly. There's so much out there. We can't cover everything. So what is it that we are going to cover? So we spent just a couple of months literally deliberating and sharing information and reading different articles, and came to a point where like, okay, we really need to start outlining and drafting because we aren't going to hit the end of the research, right? There's just going to continuously be more information. And so once we started drafting, we brought that initial draft to some partners late spring, I think it was in May. Chris and I brought in some colleagues from outside of DPI to say, hey, you know, what do you think of this? And the general consensus was, wow, this is just way too long. You know, and people could tell that there were a number of different authors because, you know, each team member had thrown their piece together. And we had to kind of go back to the drawing board a little bit and find a way to shorten it up and to sort of make it sound more like it had one voice instead of, you know, a different voice for everyone on the team. So the revisions and the formatting changes that you're seeing today, evolved out of this, and the publication, it has a June 2024 publication date, but it really wasn't released to the field until August. We just wanted to make sure that the timing was right and that people would be able to see it. Had to go through a few checks and balances before it actually got out, which tends to be the case when you're working with a huge agency that's part of government. Which is contrary to the fast pace at which AI is moving. So one of our worries was, you know, by the time we go through all of the cycles of checking and rechecking and formatting and getting everything approved, what we have is going to be outdated. So one of the ways that we tried to counter that was, and I'll show you this in a minute, was really coming and being very forward about the fact that this is the first version and that this is something that will continue to evolve and change. And as more questions are asked, we will be answering those questions and we will be trying our best to move the document forward and let it grow a little bit more organically. And that all we were providing in the first generation was like a foundation, a groundwork, something for people to start with. So we want to support our districts and our libraries on their journeys. So in this iteration, what you're going to see is that we've highlighted some things to consider, some opportunities for engagement, some strategies, but nothing very specific. There wasn't, you know, this is how you work AI, or this is how you teach about it, or this is the one website that's going to give you everything. It's a very broad lens that we're looking with. And like I said, is just the beginning. So what I want to show you right now, just to give you context of what you're looking at, in case you haven't already been in the document, is to just give you an idea of what it looks like. So yes, it's a PDF, and we actually sort of fought against that a little bit because we're thinking, it needs to be live and changing and evolving, and PDFs are hard to do that with, but that's how DPI issues our formal documents. It's in PDFs, so that was where we wound up. And you will see that the table of contents will sort of follow today's presentation. We're not going to hit everything for you, but we're going to hit some of the highlights. And this is what I was talking about. Here's our version history, the initial document in 624, version 1.0. We'll talk later about 1.1. We don't even think we're going to get to 2 right away. We're just going to answer some more questions and get to 1.1. And that's sort of explained in this roadmap of how we're moving forward. Dr. Underly, of course, has, her introduction to this, and the last piece I'll show you so that nobody gets dizzy looking at me scroll is just a general list so you can kind of see some of the people that were involved. We do have our 2 main authors, like I said, from the Division of Academic Excellence, and then this was our initial team, which will grow now for the next versions. So we did keep our team internal for this version. That changes now as we move forward. We will be looking at and have already added external partners to the conversation so that it isn't solely coming from DPI, because it is important to know and be in communication and collaborate with the field so that everybody's sort of speaking the same language and everybody's needs are being met. So with that, go ahead and turn it over.
So we want to make sure that also we respect the fact that everybody who's here today, and as we have this ongoing conversation with the field about AI, that folks that make up the whole educational spectrum are going to be coming to this topic with different experiences when it comes to this broad concept of AI. Considering that, both in the document, I think for the purposes of today's presentation, we wanted to make sure that we define what AI is, quote unquote, in context for the sake of clarity as we kind of navigate and move through the document. So some of you, I'm sure, are already familiar with this, but just to make sure that we're hitting this home, artificial intelligence, generally speaking, encompasses technologies and systems capable of processing vast amounts of information, sensing, reasoning, acting, or adapting, quote unquote, like humans, but with the speed and accuracy of computers, right? So artificial intelligence at face value means a lot of different things and is already being utilized and has been utilized for years and years in a number of different technologies, softwares, apps, platforms that I'm sure everybody here uses. Some of you might not have had any idea that AI was kind of happening in the background, so to speak, with some of the things that you use. For example, you're using Google Maps and you make a wrong turn. AI automatically goes, great, well, we know where you're headed, so what's the best way that we can really quickly get you on track? Or perhaps it's your phone that is listening to you speak, listening to me present right now, and is going to give you targeted ads later relative to your browsing history. Or perhaps it is on your calendar. It's something on your Outlook calendar where it automatically kind of takes a look at your habits, figures out what your work and meeting habits are, and goes, okay, well, I know that I want to plug in some focus time for you on your calendar each week so that you have time to get your work done. I'm going to learn your habits and then put that in for you, right? Those types of AI are not necessarily what we're honing in on when it comes to us thinking about AI in the context of educational spaces that teachers, librarians, library users, students would be really considering. So machine learning here, framed as ML, is a subset of AI that involves machines autonomously extracting knowledge from data, learning from it, and making informed decisions. And so what we really are talking about when it comes to the rest of this document in most cases is the idea of generative AI. These are the examples of things like ChatGPT or Microsoft Copilot or Google Gemini, which are these apps or platforms or tools that use machine learning to create new content like images, text, audio, and video based on user inputs. That's wherein we think there's going to be the most robust conversation around the how, the why, the risks, the best practices. What do we look towards the future of using AI in the grand scope of the educational spectrum of Wisconsin? So next slide, please. So I think when we, as Monica mentioned, and we touched on already, like when we were developing this document, this was cross-agency expertise, right? So we had folks from special ed. We had those of us on the library services team. Like Monica mentioned, we had a lot of folks that are from the Division of Academic Excellence, some of the traditional classroom-based consultants. And what we had decided when thinking about this was we really wanted to make sure that this document could be informational and helpful, regardless of what somebody's role is in the educational landscape of Wisconsin. So bearing that in mind, we recognized that the information that we might be presenting to a group of librarians that might get a little bit more granular, if we were to get granular, that we get really into the nitty gritty of that, wouldn't necessarily be as helpful if you're a school district administrator who's looking to have conversations about policy and AI, or perhaps you're on a district board and you're going to be voting about AI. Perhaps you are a parent who's just looking to garner some information about what AI might look like in an educational space and have some context for having those conversations with your student or young library user. Considering that, we really tried to pull out some core concepts in reviewing state guidance documents about AI from North Carolina, California, Washington State, among others. We all sort of took one of those state guidance documents that had been released prior to ours, did some studying on it, and decided, okay, what are the core concepts we really want to pull out of this that we think will be the most valuable in generating an AI guide, an initial draft, bear that in mind, AI guidance document that could be helpful no matter who you are in coming to this work in Wisconsin. So we're going to highlight here just some of the core concepts that we really decided would be valuable for us to focus on. One thing that we wanted to immediately talk about was the idea of AI as a tool. And so the same way that Google might be used as a tool in a classroom or library setting, what does AI look like when it is offers some personalized learning and educational exploration? It's really it could be seen in the framework of information seeking technology, right? Second to that, we thought about, and when I say second to that, I don't mean in any particular order, just kind of as we moved through these and decided we were going to put these in the doc, critical thinking with AI was a real crucial piece in this too, is how we can leverage what AI is and its very nature to encourage and help students and young library users approach adaptability and problem solving, and also, most importantly, potentially reflecting about the limitations of artificial intelligence. So while AI, of course, could be seen as a tool, something like Google, there's also some interesting minutia in the way that AI functions that does set it apart from traditional tools or information-seeking search engines, et cetera, online. And that's the idea of AI mimicking a human learning and human response to some relative degree. So considering that, we really thought about AI as a partner where appropriate, and that's important that where appropriate, AI could be seen as a learning collaborator, but it's important to emphasize that it is not a replacement to traditional educators, librarians, et cetera. We then thought about AI as a powerful emergent technology. And this is an interesting one to me because it's rare when you have something that might be as disruptive to the technological sphere and to the educational sphere as something like AI and its rapid growth and evolution. So while that, of course, comes with plenty of pitfalls and concerns for all of us in the library world, there's a piece of this that is exciting and also presents a lot of opportunity with us being the educators that are figuring this out while we're on the ground floor, and so to speak, of this technology as it evolves really quickly over the next years, and in all likelihood will define a great many things in the US, including how education functions. We also thought about inquiry-based learning and how AI as a tool for reflection, using this and thinking about the inputs and outputs and how one interfaces with it, allows for enhanced research capability, analysis, and examination of information, right? So if you're going into this at the outset of, I know that I'm going to have to vet this information a little bit more thoughtfully after I use this tool, then it really encourages this positive feedback loop of inquiry when using these types of tools or thought partners. And finally, and this is one that I think really was really struck us, was very compelling to almost all of us on the AI work group was, and I should say, to give them credit, we kind of borrowed this from Washington State's AI guidance because I think they really hammered this home. This is this idea of HAIH, a human-centered AI approach. It's a really simple mnemonic tool that can be remembered. This is what's exciting for me about it is like, if you're doing a library program about this and you're going to be talking about AI to young people, or you're a teacher who's talking about AI to young people, this, 4-letter, 3-part, super simple mnemonic tool is easy for everybody to remember that really grounds AI usage in a human-centered approach. That AI requires thoughtful human input. You get your AI output, and then it requires thoughtful human reflection and assessment before utilizing that information.
All right. One of the overwhelming things about AI is that at first blush, many people are just very entranced and excited and talk about all of the great things that it can possibly do, which it can. And I feel that my voice on the committee was often connected to the idea of balance, and that there are great things and benefits, but there are also risks about AI. And primarily, I think one of the first things people think about is data privacy, possibly, because that's when we think about technology and we think about risks, that's what we've been used to in the past, that one of the risks of technology in general is data privacy. We know that from putting our circulation systems, online and other things like that. So we are really quick to think about data privacy in terms of technology. And definitely there is that aspect with AI, tenfold or more. But another piece is that we need to really understand how AI is built. It didn't come out of nowhere. It came out of a knowledge base. And the knowledge base it comes from contains systemic bias and inaccuracies, because humans have bias and inaccuracies, right? Because as Chris pointed out, it starts with human input. So all of these great tools that are out there, they didn't just create themselves. The people that behind the technology took human knowledge, took human input, and there's been some great conversations about copyright and what people can and can't take. And if you can find it on the internet, is it automatically yours? Or do people have rights to that? There's been all kinds of conversations already about the ethics of copyright, but also when you're taking all that information in, you have to know that you are taking in systemic bias and inaccuracy. So one of the things that has to happen as you adopt different tools is identifying and mitigating bias through evaluating what resources you are using, and also like where that information is coming from, as well as, and we'll talk about this in a couple of minutes, how do you protect your own data? How do you be very conscious and aware of the data that you're putting in? There are features in a lot of the generative AI tools where you can allow it to collect your questions and your ideas, or you can turn that feature off. So people have to be aware of those things. We all have our policies about technology, and most of those are going to need a refresh with AI. AI doesn't need its own policy. It needs something that is integrated into what's already there. Many tech developers have talked about AI as a bigger advancement for us to get our heads around than other technology advances. For example, having iPhones, right, was a huge deal. Having the internet, huge deal. But this is bigger than that. The impact on our world is bigger. Everything from environmental issues, the use of water, for example, that is used to cool all of the computer warehouses that are building the AI. that water is a resource that's being used now in the tech world, and how is that impacting the rest of the world where those places are? There's social justice issues around looking at the information. Just a quick example, generating one AI image takes the same amount of power as charging a phone from a dead battery to complete charge, and that's just to make one image. So what we're looking at in terms of generative AI is changing the world in a much bigger way than some of our other technology advances. So there's no way in our spaces we have control over that, but we do have to create an awareness around it and then think about that as we move forward, what we're subscribing to and what we're not. I know this is, questions similar to these were asked many. I don't know if any of you caught it. Oprah Winfrey did a special on AI last week, 2-hour special, and brought in a lot of speakers. And I think when Oprah talks about it, it's not that she's an expert, but I think it really brings the concept to the masses. So people that may not have been thinking about AI as something that was impactful, hopefully now more people know about it. I really enjoy listening to Tom Mulaney, and I can share that contact with you, but he is somebody who he's more school focused, but he's really looking at those risks. He tends to focus more on that. So I balance his ideas and posts and gathering of information with some of the things that are coming across, telling us that AI is going to save the day, right? So it really is about balance. It's not going to fix everything and make lives easier, but it's also, not bad to experiment and move forward with it either. So balance the scales.
In the vein of Monica talking too about revising policies and taking a look at how considerations and usage of AI, especially like in a public library space for the sake of us having this discussion today, intersects with your existent technology and frankly, then the expectations surrounding that your users might have, that your library users might have. One of the biggest kind of nuts and bolts part of all of this is security and infrastructure, right? I mean, there's a lot of conversations we can have about the philosophical pitfalls or opportunities that AI brings with it, but there's a pragmatic conversation to be had about the technology itself, how your policies intersect with technology, and how, for example, you already do your best, hopefully, in your public libraries to protect your users' privacy and to make sure that your systems are secure. And so this page, which is highlighted here in the AI guidance, I think is in many cases, you could substitute the term AI here for a number of different things, and these would still be valuable best practices when it comes to ensuring, do you have the right hardware in your space? Do you have the right policies in your space to help manage conversations and interfacing with your user base around that hardware, around those tools? And are you doing all that you can to protect patron privacy and make sure that your staff are well trained to understand the nuance of privacy and how this infrastructure intersects with emergent technologies like AI? But even taking a look at this list, I think that this is best practice moving forward as the conversations about AI continue to evolve, continue to shift. There are new concerns that emerge, and there are very likely going to be new technologies there are going to be technologies that are probably going to have AI as a part of them, whether we want them or not. I know that there are already multiple phones where the newest version of the phone comes with this, and it is the more and more that these companies are looking to both utilize data for their own purposes, but also really try to persuade their audience that they know what's best for them for their technological future. It might not be quite so easy to turn off the ability to have this AI on your device. And so as that continues to emerge, as we look towards laptops and computers in libraries, the newest versions of Windows that might have a version of Copilot with it, what have you, I think these bullet points here restrict access to student, or in this case, library user data to authorized persons personnel to remove personally identifiable information from data sets, to conduct comprehensive evaluations of AI implementations, and define specific retention periods for student data. As government organizations, we of course already have specific retention schedules that we have to meet. So this is another really good opportunity to review that in your library space and ensure that how you're approaching things like AI, which is a whole new ball of wax when it comes to user input, how that combines or connects with your existent policies and schedules, for example, for records retention. To provide comprehensive staff training on student data privacy. I think this is another thing, right? Like y'all are here right now listening to us talk about AI. This is excellent CE. Hopefully that you're reflecting on this type of stuff. But if you are a leader in your space and your staff are not being given the opportunity yet or have not found the best opportunity yet to pursue similar education around this, I think now is as good a time as any to start thinking about that and trying to filter some of these educational opportunities into your staff. A big thing that might be happening moving forward, and we've seen this happen regrettably in libraries before, when there is a data breach or when there is some concern over misuse of data in a library setting, you might want to start thinking about what type of data breach response plan you might have as a library. And that's a great conversation to have with your city administrator or city manager, your board of trustees, potentially even your city council, the lawyer that might be at your city. These are great conversations to begin having, to be asking, hey, city colleagues of ours, are you having these conversations? Are you thinking about this? Do we want to table this to be spoken about at a meeting, a board of trustees meeting, or potentially a city council meeting? That way you can have a unified approach to this stuff, because you can bet that if something like this could happen to the library, it could certainly happen in another part of your municipality. And if the library can be a shining example of security and infrastructure, you can set a really positive precedent for how the rest of your municipality might follow suit. A big thing, and I know this is a challenge depending on where you're at in Wisconsin, but investing in high-speed internet infrastructure, if and where possible, this is going to be extremely valuable, as there's a lot of resources that are eaten up with AI. I know that's an ever, evolving challenge itself, especially in more rural parts of the state, but it is always something to hit home that's very valuable for us to consider. Think about cloud platforms for flexible computing and power and storage, as opposed to traditional methods of data retention, hard drives and thumb drives, et cetera. Cloud, of course, cloud access is becoming increasingly popular and much more affordable than some traditional means. So that might be a consideration. To deploy scalable and secure data storage solutions, kind of goes hand in hand in some ways with the cloud platform concept. To think about investing in user-friendly AI development platforms and frameworks. We in the library world, of course, have a lot of subscriptions to things that we might purchase that are give access to certain things that our library users might be able to take advantage of. There is a not so distant future world where I can imagine libraries purchasing access and weaving this into their security and infrastructure, perhaps as a part of conversations with their library system they belong to, but purchasing and subscriptions to AI models for their users to be able to access and utilize. And it might even be something that could be quite forward thinking for a library that could also be helping set the precedent about policies for using that subscription service as a library user. Some big questions to consider that we might really be able to dig into more in the next couple of years, collectively and collaboratively. Some libraries use things like Niche Academy, or some systems have things like Niche Academy, a learning management system for their staff and potentially even for library users if it's around a certain topic or program. There may be considerations of compatibility between AI applications and learning management systems that folks might want to vet. Assessing the compatibility of existing hardware infrastructure. This is another interesting piece too, because a lot of times in Wisconsin, it depends on what system you belong to. And there's a lot of control and regulation that happens about hardware infrastructure at that system level. So for some of you, this might be broaching these conversations with your system consultants or system leaders and saying, what are you thinking about when it comes to this in the long term? How are you thinking about adapting potentially system-based technology policies or mitigating risks when it comes to AI at a system level? And then finally, prioritizing the development of AI solutions that comply with accessibility standards. I think it goes without saying that in the public library sphere, we are all and ought to be all extremely thoughtful about accessibility. And accessibility takes many forms in a library setting. But how does AI intersect with accessibility in a space? What opportunities does it afford? What challenges does it produce? I mean, one of the things that we talked about from internally about this was how AI could even further the digital divide as you have more urban or metropolitan areas that maybe have the ability to contribute more resources, training, investment, exploration of AI usage. And unfortunately, in more rural settings where there's less resources, there's less staff time available, they may not be able to tackle AI with the same gusto. And that might even further increase that digital divide. And so I think prioritizing the development of some solutions around this that could comply not just with accessibility standards, but with long-term thinking of making sure that we don't increase that digital divide can be really helpful as we look forward with security and infrastructure.
The next section that we dove into in the guidance is really focused around professional development. And it does cross over to libraries. I think the overarching theme is to keep learning, right? So these were the 5 pillars that were presented. And the first is kind of what you're doing today, is just understanding what AI is and the machine learning basics. And then in schools, we talk about the next phase is that integration, right? Because this isn't a standalone topic. It's not something that we teach to kids. That should be a lesson we've learned from other technologies. For example, digital citizenship was, something that people talked, oh, well, wait, we need a class on that. Well, the class on that doesn't work well because the kids are creating fake situations in which to be good digital citizens. So it needs to be integrated, just like research. Oh, we're doing some research on a topic and we need to do a report. So what are the things, that we're citing our sources, that if we're interacting with someone and asking for information, through some sort of chatbot, how is that happening? How are we citing it? So the idea of that integration is important because it becomes everybody's responsibility. There isn't that one teacher, that one librarian who is going to be responsible for, educating the masses about AI. That person may do the initial understanding, but the integration comes everywhere. It's important to have hands-on experiences. Obviously, that's not what we're practicing today because that's like just another level. Like if we had time, we would go into, trying to do some activities where you could experience AI, and maybe some of your other sessions that you've been attending could do that. But the idea is to actually do the exploration so that you can see what's happening. I will tell you that, as I mentioned before, I really am tuned into bias. And one of the tools that was introduced to me a few months ago was supposed to be this great tool for creating an image. So everybody in the group was creating images. And I was very shocked to see that in the description I gave, even though I did not gender the individual, it came up as a female, as a white female, and I had specifically asked for a person. I would have preferred a non-binary person, but the way that it came up was very distinctly biased. And I played with changing some search terms to change the picture. And that's the type of thing that you can only do in that hands-on experience to see how it happens in real time. Of course, the idea of collaborating and networking, there's just too much information out there for any one person to be the sole expert. And so the idea of working together and being able to help each other along, and I'll use this as another plug for public and school librarians to connect with each other, because this may start in schools, but we're putting out adults, lifetime learners, that need to be connected with their public libraries. So the idea that the resources can be shared, that people are speaking the same languages, that you possibly have high school students that may be helping in your library, you know, to help collaborate around this topic is super helpful. And then the fifth point is this continuous learning and adaptability. Because of the quick pace of this, it is not something that we can, you know, do even this presentation and say, oh yeah, we'll come back next year. No, if we come back next year, it'll be an entirely different presentation. So these pillars have more depth within the guidance, but I wanted to just to touch on each of them with you today and just highlight as you're reading them. You know, the audience sometimes sounds like it's just talking to K-12 educators, but we really did make an effort to address all the readers of the document in the text.
Yeah, I mean, Monica highlighting to the collaborative piece of this, I think is really the name of the game, because as everybody here, I'm sure, expects, with the rapid evolutions of AI that seem to happen almost day by day, which brings with it new opportunities, risks, of learning about it, practicing it, practically implementing it, and then beyond that, developing some local best practices for it, maybe in your public library space. So what do we do here, right? There's three things that you can always try to remember about this. Monitoring AI usage as it is implemented in a library space, or as your user base has conversations with you about it, has asks from you all as public librarians about AI. Perhaps you at some point are doing programs about AI that could be targeted towards youth services, teen services, or as Monica lifted up, which is a very special place that we find ourselves in the public library setting for our lifelong learners, the adults that want to figure out how does AI impact their life. So monitor that. That's a conversation you can be having with your user base, and you can be keeping a keen eye on that. But it's not just monitoring, right? It's also about evaluation. So what do you do when you have that information that you have garnered from these types of things? It's about getting feedback from others, other educators, perhaps collaborating with your school librarian on different initiatives in this space. Consider the learning outcomes, the risks, the rewards of AI, and surveys. Surveys are a really valuable way of getting your finger on the pulse when it comes to what your users in your community, what their thoughts are about AI. Do they want more? Are they scared of AI? Maybe they're hungry and ready for some integrations or implementations that you hadn't considered prior. So the evaluation piece is key there. And finally, just like Monica was hitting on with the professional development, the continuous improvement of policies and procedures related to AI, seeking training for staff and mitigating bias and making sure that we integrate accessibility and AI best practices is key. That is something you have to keep doing, is trying to be better in this space. One of the questions that I think emerged right away as soon as conversations about AI started to spark a year and a half, 2 years ago was, oh, are librarians going to be obsolete because of AI? It's still a popular question that you hear, right? And while not trying to sound overly cynical about this, I think my response to that from the very beginning has been, no, I absolutely don't believe that librarians will be obsolete by AI. But that being said, as we start to look 5-10 years down the line, is there the possibility that librarians that close their eyes and ignore AI could suffer some obsolescence in the face of librarians that are at least embracing to understand AI, figuring out how to utilize it and trying to keep up with it, right? That's a very real possibility as we consider ourselves information professionals and we look at this from an information science perspective. So the continuing training for this is really, really key, and making sure that you all are empowered in the AI space and not just glancing at it and then moving on to the next thing, I think.
I love that, Chris, and that idea of, yeah, you're not going to be obsolete, but you could make yourself obsolete, you know, by not being that information specialist that we all have entered the career for. So one of the things, and this is where Chris and I, you know, personalize this just a little bit, because we know that at the end of the AI guidance document is a long list of resources. It is a small fraction of the amount of resources that were originally listed. So we were not part of picking that list, so we decided to pick from that list and personalize this a little bit to narrow down to some of our favorites for you. So due to time, I am not going to open really any of these, but just kind of give you an overview of what each link is for. And when you have the presentation, you'll be able to link on each one of these. So Teach AI, just like it says, a lot of policy and guidance around AI in education. That one made the top of the list because back when this was first, sparking in the education world, Dr. Underly did sign on to make Wisconsin a partner with Teach AI. So I feel like that one, if we're going to look at resources, we need to keep that first and foremost, because it is something that our state superintendent has signed on and agreed with. So those resources are of value. The second one, AI for Education, is a really deep resource. Like you can start in here and go down the rabbit hole and stay there for quite a while. There's a lot of different educational resources, and I don't mean education as in like trying to teach AI, but just resources to educate yourself, resources with templates and different ways to vet things, all of those ideas that Chris and I have been talking about. There's some real good tools in there that could be used in schools, adapted for libraries, all kinds of stuff there. So why reinvent the wheel? Like if we're telling you need to vet your resources, why not take a look at some of these tools to help you do that? I think that the Google Applied Digital Skills is a nice, everyday, easy kind of tutorial to work through, right? So Google does a really nice job with their Applied Skills series. And so when you're looking to just sort of get your feet wet, understand things, go through the tutorials, kind of like taking a mini course, I think this is a nice tool for that. Of course, PBS is one of our primary partners at DPI. So the PBS Learning Media website has a number of videos around artificial intelligence. Not all of them are brand new. Some of them talk about other forms, not just generative AI, but other forms of artificial intelligence. So if video is your learning style, there's some great ones listed there. And then News Literacy Project isn't actually in the guidance. Shh, don't tell anybody. But I love this resource for so many different reasons. And one of the tools they have on there is how AI plays into news literacy. And I think that that's so relevant. They also have a wonderful tool at looking at election bias in the media. So I just had to share that one with you today because I think it's just widely applicable no matter who you are. There's wonderful, wonderful tools in there for AI and news literacy in general. And then Chris added the last one, so I'll let him talk a little bit about that before I switch to slide over.
Yeah, so thanks, Monica. The State Libraries and AI Technologies Working Group, or SLAYIT, if you're looking at it that way, is a joint project of 17 state libraries that are working to collaboratively to understand the opportunities, challenges, and risks associated with AI and the library sector. And that includes school libraries, academic libraries, and public libraries, special libraries. It's a real broad approach that they're taking. But the working group's goals are proactivity, insight, and workforce. And so I think that that's a space where we're going to continue to see. It's sort of a think tank that will be ongoing, that will hopefully continue to not only vet resources from a very library particular perspective, but also really continue to try to tackle these concerns and these challenges as they arise. We were considering being a part of this group as a state library agency, but there was a pretty hefty cost associated with being a part of that working group. So I think instead we will be able to reap the benefits, save the money on the front end, and reap the benefits of this working group as they start to produce more. But you might want to check out their website for some of their long-term plans, including things like resources, training and instruction, an AI petting zoo, and more. So making sure that we respect the time here, I want to make sure that we keep some time for for questions here at the end. I'll just go over, we have some long-term approaches, or a long-term approach now that we are thinking about what is the next iterations of the AI document, like Monica mentioned earlier, it might be just draft 1.1, and how are we going to get relevant feedback and work on specific topics in that cross over with AI that will be of value for our educators, including y'all librarians, to bear in mind moving forward. So the 5 points at this point that we're thinking about is developing practitioner subcommittees. We have already reached out and surveyed the field and garnered interest from various people, from librarians to teachers, school librarians, all sorts of different folks that have expressed interest in being part of these conversations. And we got a robust amount of responses to that. So we have a great group of people that are wanting to be on various subcommittees to help us ideate about specific subjects. So the subjects that we're going to be focusing on with these sort of 5 different subcommittees in the near future is going to be identifying and engaging with district and library exemplars in the AI space. If you would consider yourself one of those, please feel free to contact us and say, hey, I'm really excited about what we're doing with AI. I'd like to talk to you about that. One thing is assessing and sharing valuable professional development opportunities. We would like to be, as much as we possibly can, be a well-vetted clearinghouse for the types of future opportunities for y'all to engage with in this space. At least to put some sort of DPI brand on it that we feel that this is going to be valuable for the folks in the field. One big one is us better evaluating the social emotional learning capabilities and risks of AI. I think it's harder than ever to be a young person that's going through school. And I think that with the emergence of more deepfake technology and abilities for others to manipulate someone's so-called digital identity, that is a very scary thing when you're a younger person. And so I think when we're really going to try to dig into bullying and how this might intersect with AI, but also some of the capabilities that AI might offer that things in the past have not been able to really quite reach yet. Young learners and AI, which includes considerations, policy, federal regulations, things like COPA and other federal acts that are doubtless, if not already, going to be intersecting with AI on the state, regional, local level, et cetera. And then finally, what are the evolving security and privacy analysis and best practices that libraries can institute in their spaces?
Yes, and we are doing all of that by December. That's the ask.
We're
Those were
taking care of
actually
it.
the top categories from cabinet that we were looking at to move forward by December. So that's what we have to look forward to. So at this point, I'm going to stop sharing. You see that Chris and I have shared our contact information with you, but hopefully we have a couple of questions.
Thank you, Monica and Chris, and really our thanks to the whole work group. This is fantastic to see this coming together. If anyone does have additional questions, please, now is your time to ask them. They are ours for another 7 minutes. Drop those questions in the chat or the Q&A. We have a couple of more specific questions Allie asked, and you may have anecdotal information that you can share with us about how teachers are guarding against AI's use in homework. We saw earlier today a couple of detection programs that papers can be run through, but is there concern about the ethics of students using AI and our teachers combating that or trying to find ways to intervene?
Yeah, I'll start on that one as it's a school focus. So I think that is a very common first question. And, we've had dishonest academic behavior in schools for a very long time. Plagiarism is nothing new. Copying is nothing new. Does AI change it? Yes. However, most of the detection tools are not considered accurate. There is also some problematic studies that have been done where the detection tools implicate people have used AI when they have not. There's been bias detected in the tools themselves that try to detect AI. So it's very much the Wild West. Is it a concern? Absolutely. But one of the things in education that we're always moving towards or should be moving towards is that authentic instruction. And that authentic instruction includes a lot more than just the final answer, right? And it pushes teachers. There was one push in, when the internet was sort of the brand new thing of, we really need to do more interactive. We need to do more best practice instruction in the classroom so that, we can adjust to the access to this huge amount of information out there. So I think, yes, cheating is a consideration. People have already, started different ways to combat that. They're trying not to revert back to, the original, which was you just can't have it in school because we learned that that didn't work a long time ago. I also think that the social emotional piece that Chris brought up may be even more problematic than cheating. Because what we are seeing is, for example, a student taking a picture of another student and then AIing it so that that student doesn't have any clothes on, for example, and then bullying, harassing, embarrassing another student with that. So like there's just so many different things. I think that cheating on a paper or on a math problem is sort of the tip of the iceberg. So there is a lot to explore and a lot to learn, which is why we all need to get that foundation under us and keep asking the critical questions. We can't be sheep on this one. We can't let anybody tell us that this is the best tool and just use it and do it, because we have to be critical about our choices. That is super, super important.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question too, in that even universities at this point, Monica and I have the opportunity to talk a lot with some of our colleagues over at like UW-Madison. Many universities aren't even adapting yet explicit policies for AI usage for college students or for the professors themselves, leaving it to a type of local decision to that professor in their classroom. And so I think it's such a valuable question because Monica raised up so many excellent points that are so much broader even than just cheating itself. And because of that, the breadth of those concerns, I think many institutions are moving slowly or are being very discretionary and hesitant about wanting to be explicit about any one choice or policy or et cetera. So that's an ongoing conversation that I think a lot of it will be valuable to have those conversations too with your local school librarian, your teachers in your area, et cetera.
Excellent. Thank you. And Chris did put in the chat an example from Kenosha Public Library of an AI policy that they have been working on. If you are looking for additional continuing education and are planning to attend the Wisconsin Library Association conference coming up in November, the Kenosha Library staff will also be presenting on their policy and the development and implementation of it, if that's something that you are considering for your library or your community. Another question that came up very early in your presentation was in relation to supporting homeschool families. So as you were adopting and creating this, this guidance, were you considering homeschool families, or in what ways can we in public libraries get this information out to and support our homeschool students and families?
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting question as somebody who was a public librarian and really had a lot of experience working in a community that had a lot of homeschooling families too. What I would say is some of the best work that a librarian could do in this space is trying out these AI products and becoming more proficient with them. That'll be the best way that you'll be able to identify uses that homeschooling families could really sink their teeth into and really find a lot of value in. I think that there's some obvious things that I could lift up is the fact that AI does tend to have, and this is a little bit, concerning for some folks, but the machine learning capabilities can allow for AI products to particularly learn the nuances of a homeschooling family and what their sensibilities or values are in terms of finding information. Another piece of it potentially is as a role play thought partner. There are AI out there that says that that you can essentially have a conversation with Shakespeare, a version of that in AI form, right? So that becomes an almost in-person role-playing ability for a homeschooling family to engage with certain subject matter. I also think there's the artistic component of it, the idea of creating imagery or creating sound with AI and using that from a sensory perspective of exploring different things, visual arts and music, etc. So while all of that is complicated and we're kind of at time here, I would just say that I think that the biggest thing is that a librarian tries these things out and becomes proficient with them to figure out the best ways of exploring these and having conversations with homeschool families.
And I will also echo that and say one more time, this is a great place to talk to your school folks, because using the resources that are vetted for schools, or, ones that have a reputation for working in education, super important. You talk about privacy, that's where I think our homeschooling families may not have all the same resources to vet out something, and know that they're not giving away their child's privacy. So, having the conversations with the school is super important, because there's great tutoring tools out there. As Chris was mentioning, there's some really wonderful tools, but there's also ones that may not be. So be careful.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for that insight. Thank you for sharing with us today. Chris did share both he and Monica's contact information in the chat if you have further questions or wanted to follow up on anything. I've also posted a link to the DPI's website that you can have access to that full document, and keep an eye on your email as well. I know Chris and Monica have both been really transparent in sharing and encouraging folks to read through that document, and as they have updates to it, those will come to us that way as well. So with that, just thank you all for joining us today. Chris and Monica, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to be with us. As a reminder to all of you, there will be a link after you exit today's webinar to offer some feedback on today's session that we'll share back with Monica and Chris, that will also help us inform future Tech Days events. And you'll receive an email from me tomorrow with a link to the recording and the slides, and then they will also be available on the Tech Days website. I hope that you will join us again. We start tomorrow at 10 a.m. Our first session is with Kate Owens from the Bay Area Workforce Development Board. She is going to be talking about how workforce development is adapting with the introduction of virtual reality, artificial intelligence in the workforce development space, and also how they're partnering with Northeast Wisconsin libraries to provide access to technology to patrons through job pods. So we will see you all, I hope, tomorrow morning, and everyone else, have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye.